So far, we've studied one type of screen, that of the work withs. We saw that, when we apply the pattern to a transaction, objects are automatically created for handling, in smart devices, the information of elements recorded by the transaction. So in runtime, we could work with one screen that lists the information of the elements stored, and with another screen for displaying the full details of a specific element selected. That is to say that a particular pattern is applied to an entity in our system. In order to implement these screens, the pattern does something for us. It places certain controls in the layouts. For instance, for the list screen, it places a grid and some attributes of the transaction. And for the detail screen, it implements sections. The general section, where it places the transaction's attribute controls in the layout. And in the cases of subordinate information, the corresponding sections with a grid including the necessary attributes. As we've seen, we may customize these layouts by taking away or replacing attributes, or by changing some of the properties of the predefined elements. So, why shouldn't we specify everything from the start? If we consider the dialog for creating objects in geneXus, filtering those that apply to smart devices, we will see that we have the object work with for smart devices. That is, we can create it without associating it with any transaction. In this case, we will be free to specify the list and detail screens as we consider most convenient. geneXus will simply create the structure. This is how it'll automatically create the list, with a grid in the layout for us to include whatever we need in it. And to have details if we want. And now we have the full structure. It created the detail node, and within the general section, whose layout is empty, waiting for us to fill it out with whatever controls we may need. There are no tables associated with this work with. The place from where the information will be loaded will be established depending on the controls we place in each layout, and on whether they are inside grids or not. We may even create other parallel levels, both within this work with, and within a work with created by geneXus, when applying the pattern to a transaction. This instance of the work with is the same as this other one. Except for the fact that this last one is shown separately, and the other one is shown within the transaction. Let's add a new level. Then we specify a name for it. For example, let's suppose that this level, parallel to the one we had specified, will be used to show only the visits to the real estate properties scheduled for a given date, data which we obtain from the user. It is not the case for this list, which does not have a parm rule. So what we do is, following which, we'll be able to see that the layout is created with an empty grid. We will have to specify what we want to show. The time of the visit, we change the class for the text to appear in yellow at runtime, the potential client, the prospect, and we also want the visits to appear grouped by property. and within that order, we want them sorted by time of visit. What remains is to specify a parm rule. If we also want to view the detail of a visit from the list when we tap on it, then we should add the detail node to it. And specify the load of the layout. Let's note something. The only difference between the list's layout and the one in the general section is that geneXus automatically initiates a grid in the first one. But we could also place that same grid if we wanted to. So, we have just seen that the screens in the work with are a specific case of a more general case, a panel object. Let's remove the detail, which we won't be using. In a work with, we have implemented several panels together, one for each node. But we might need only one of these screens, for example, to request the user to enter a date, and from there invoke the list we've just created. To do this, we create a panel object for smart devices. We can see that an empty layout comes up. Since we want to request the user to enter a date, we insert a variable of the date type. If we note its properties, we will see that read-only is set to false, which will make the device's date picker open up to the user in runtime, to allow the user to select a date. Once the user has done this, we will want to invoke the list just created, using that variable as a parameter. Therefore, all we need is a button associated with a user event for programming that invocation. Buttons may be placed not only on the action bar, but also within the layout itself, which is what we'll do. Prior to writing the invocation, let's save. So the level is entered by date. And now we invoke the work with of property appointment in its by date level, following which the list will appear automatically because there is no other possibility. We set the variable by parameter, and this panel is ready. Note that it does not access the database at all because we have not placed any attributes in the layout. We will now place another action in the dashboard to invoke this panel. F5. We enter a date. Press the button. And view the visits scheduled for this date, grouped by property. Since they're not associated with a business component, panels are highly flexible for a series of different and interesting uses, such as configuring wizards, showing messages, creating other types of menus different from dashboards. For example, a button menu. or for showing information originating in other sources, from data providers for instance. Let's then suppose that we have defined an SDT collection that will record, for each real estate property, the name and the number of visits scheduled for it. We want to show them on a screen, for which purpose, on a panel for smart devices, we define a variable of the SDT collection type we've just created. We insert it in the layout, which will cause an offer to select the elements of the SDT that we want to include in the grid, and let's suppose we want to include all of them in this case, and in the refresh event, executed on the server, we program the invocation to the data provider, which we must create previously, of course, which returns the loaded variable. We could also invoke a procedure or a web service, with the condition that it return the variable with that structure loaded.